Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. My name is Arfat and welcome to a brand new video. Today I'd like to share with you the life of Paul. I'll be going through his activities and I'll be going through when he possibly could have written his letters, his epistles, and this will give new people, those people who doesn't know anything about Paul, a brief overview of his life and his writings. I'm drawing materials from Raymond Brown, Introduction to the New Testament. Again, I highly recommend. I think this is the best introduction that to have been written. And please excuse me today. I don't have. I lost my voice today, but I still want to make this video. Um, yeah. So please bear with me today. So I'm reading here Raymond Brown abridged version, and I'm also using the non-abridged version that I have here. I put it on my desk because it's too heavy. The reason why I'm referring to two of these is because I'm not going to make this as comprehensive as the complete version. So I'll go back and forth between the two books, and I'll just give you a very brief life of Paul and his epistles. Now, page 149 here. Paul probably converted to Christianity, and this is implied in Galatians chapter 1, verse 17. And this is also implied in Luke in chapter 9, verse 1 to 22. Um, According to Paul's own epistles, his own writings, he went to Arabia after his conversion near Damascus, and then he after going to Arabia, he returned to Damascus after about 3 years or so. Acts is silent on this. Okay, Acts never says that Paul goes to Arabia and spent at least 3 years in Arabia. Um, Could Luke, the author of Acts, not have known this? And possibly, if not, why would he omit it? Now, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 32 and 33, Paul had to flee Damascus because of the incident there. And then he probably went to Jerusalem, and this is implied in Galatians chapter 1, verse 18, and in Acts chapter 9, verse 26 to 29. Now, probably he went to the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and again, this is implied in Galatians 1, 21 to 22. Luke mentions at this point whereby Paul is in Caesarea and Tarsus, okay, in Asia Minor, and then he went to Antioch, and then he went to Jerusalem, and then from Antioch he has his first apostolic mission, whereby he went to Seleucia, Salamis, and Cyprus. Okay, but Paul is silent on this. His epistles is silent on this. And so if we compare Paul's own writings and Acts, there's a lot of details that Paul never did, but Acts mentioned. Could it be historical? A lot of scholars reject that Acts is historical, at least when it narrates the life of Paul, because certain parts Acts contradicted Paul's own epistle. Paul evangelized the churches before he goes to Macedon and Philippi, yeah, in modern day Greece. But around this time, Luke says that he went to South Galatia, okay, which can probably be trusted as well, because and then he went to Antioch and Jerusalem. This is according to Acts as well. Paul says that in Galatians 2, chapter 2, verse 1, that he went to Jerusalem for the council. Okay, he says here, once again during 14 years I went up to Jerusalem for the council. And then we have the incident at Antioch, and so Paul had to flee and he went to Galatia. Acts mentioned that he went to Syria and Cilicia this time, and then he went to South Galatia. But Paul never says that here. Paul never did this. And then in 1 Corinthians 16 verse 1, he evangelized Galatia for the very first time. Meaning Paul went to Corinth first, okay, city south of modern Greece today, and then only he evangelized Galatia. According to E.P. Saunders, South Galatia is the highly plausible theory. And then he went to Thessalonica, okay, in Greece again. But then again in Acts he went to Amphipolis, Apollonia, and then Thessalonica. So at Acts, you can probably understand here that Acts add a lot of details that Paul never mentioned. And then he went to Beroea, and then only he went to Athens. Okay, but Pauline's epistle never mentioned that he went to Beroea. He only went to Athens. And then Corinth, okay, is evangelized. And then according to Acts, Paul stayed in Corinth for about 18 months. But Paul never mentions that. Now, Timothy arrives in Corinth, and this is implied in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 verse 6. And then Raymond Brown says here that he is probably accompanied by Silvanus, and this is implied in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 verse 1, okay, the letter carrier. But in Luke, Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia. Okay, Silas is probably another name for Silvanus. And then Paul leaves from Cenchrea, and then he leaves Priscilla and Aquila at Ephesus. But Paul never mentioned this at all. Remember, Luke mentions that Paul went to Apollo in Ephesus. Is urged by Paul to go to Corinth, okay, probably to bring the letter. 1 Corinthians 16 verse 12. Now Apollos dispatched to Achaia by Priscilla and Aquila. So there's a contradiction here. Did Paul ask Apollo to go, or did Apollo was asked to go to Achaia instead of Corinth by Priscilla and Aquila? Paul went to Caesarea Maritima, and then he went to Jerusalem, and then he spent time in Antioch for a certain period of time. But if we follow Pauline's chronology, this never happened. Probably Paul spent, after that, Paul went to North Galatia, and this is his third apostolic mission. Yeah. He went to North Galatia and Phrygia according to Acts, and he spent about 3 years or 2 years or 3 months in Ephesus. Now Paul visit Chloe's people, okay, with Stephanus, and this is implied in 1 Corinthians 1:11 and 16:17, and they bring the letter. This is also implied in Corinthians 7:1, but Acts is silent on this. Okay, Paul is in prison. Timothy was sent to Corinth, and Paul's second painful visit to Corinth, and then he returned to Ephesus. Luke again, Acts is silent on this. Acts never mentioned this at all. And then Titus was sent to Corinth with a letter written in tears. Okay, this is implied in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 13. Again, Acts is silent on this. Now, Paul plans to visit Macedonia, Corinth, and Jerusalem. Um, and this is, but according to Luke, Paul plans to visit Macedonia, Achaia, Jerusalem, and then Rome. Now, Paul had a brief ministry in Troas, and this is implied in 2 Corinthians 2:12. And then he went to Macedonia, and Acts catch up with Paul again here. Titus was sent ahead to Corinth, um, and this is if you know that the Second Corinthians was probably written by what was probably written. Second Corinthians is a letter that's made up of many other letters that have been fused together to produce Second Corinthians today. And so Titus probably was sent ahead to Corinth to bring one of these letters, okay, that later on became Second Corinthians. Again, Acts is silent on this. Paul probably went to Illyricum, and this is implied in Romans 15:19. And then he went to Achaia, and this is Paul's third visit to Corinth. And this is implied in 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1. And then Paul plans to visit Jerusalem, Rome, Spain, because he needs to visit Jerusalem to bring the money that he had collected. And then he probably wrote to the Romans from Corinth, and then he wants them to support them, probably because they have heard a lot of things about him, that he doesn't preach the law. He says that people do not need to obey the law and things like that, as in his letters to the Galatians earlier on. And so he wrote the letter to the Romans to assure them there are probably Jews in Rome that he's writing to. Again, we do not know who was he writing towards. According to Acts, he always goes to the synagogue first and preach. So probably if we follow Acts account, he probably wrote it to the Jews in Rome. But again, if Paul is silent on his epistle, so we do not know to whom he was writing towards. Now, Pauline's life here. Paul's life. He probably converted to Christianity around the year AD 36 or 36 of the Common Era. Though AD and CE, you have to be careful with the dating here. Around the year 39 of the Common Era, he probably visit Jerusalem after spending time in Damascus, whereby after he converted to Christianity, he spent time in Damascus, and then he visit Jerusalem to get cured if we follow Acts account. And then around the year 40 to 45, he was probably in Cilicia and also in Antioch. And then around the year 46 to 49, he was probably in his first ever apostolic ministry. He probably went to, it started in Antioch, and then he went to Cyprus, Southern Asia Minor, and then he returned to Antioch. 49 CE is where the Jerusalem Council or Conference took place. Okay, whether do Gentiles need to be circumcised or not? That is the Jerusalem discussion. Is this historical? Again, probably this is historical. Now, around the year 50 to 52, he embarked on his second ministry, apostolic ministry, beginning in Antioch again, and then he went through to Southern Asia Minor, to Northern Galatia, Macedonia, Corinth, and probably returned to Jerusalem and Antioch. And again, Raymond Brown says Northern Galatia, but Episandus, I believe, says Southern Galatia. I think that is the more correct opinion. Now, around the year 54 to 58, he embarked on his third apostolic mission, beginning from Antioch through northern Galatia to Ephesus. And then he stayed about 3 years in Ephesus. Probably he was imprisoned in Ephesus, we do not know. And then on the summer of 57, that summer 57, Paul goes through Macedonia towards Corinth, and then he spent the winter at Corinth before returning to Jerusalem. After the winter of 57, probably January or April of the year 58 CE. Somewhere around the year 58 to 60, Paul was arrested in Jerusalem. He was in prison for 2 years in Caesarea Philippi. We do not know. And then around the year 60 to 61, he was sent to Rome. Long sea journey. He undergone through shipwrecks. Around the year 61 to 63, he was probably imprisoned in Rome, but he still have audience, and people are still able to learn from him. He probably died in the persecution under Nero around the year 64, whereby the persecution under Nero was absolutely horrible. Peter fell victim to it according to tradition as well, and then Paul as well. And so that is the brief summary or chronology of the life of Paul. Now, a lot of the materials that narrates to us are quite in contradiction to what Paul actually mentions. Like, for example, I'll just give you a brief example. Like, Paul never goes to synagogue and preach to the Jews. Instead, he set up tent, and then he probably preached to the people that came to buy his stuff. Paul never mentions that he was a tent maker. He was probably a leather worker. And then it depends on how many times he went back to Jerusalem. In Acts, he went to Jerusalem 4 times, and then in his own epistles, he went to Jerusalem 3 times. The last time he went there, he was arrested. But Paul himself never mentions about his journey to Rome. He mentions that he wanted to go to Rome, but he never mentions that he actually went to Rome. And so this is Acts is a bit problematic because, I mean, obviously we do not even know if the last epistle that Paul wrote was actually the epistle to the Romans. In fact, we have a lot of many other Pauline letters that we do not have, like the Alpha Corinthians, according to E.P. Sanders. And then we do not have the letters because Second Corinthians was probably is probably a composite, whereby there's a bunch of other letters being combined into one letters, because there's a lot of literally seams in Second Corinthians. Some would divide it chapter 1 to 7. Chapter 8 and 9 is a different letter. Chapter 10 to 13 is a different letter. And somewhere in between chapter 4 and chapter 5 is also a different letter. And so there's about at least 2 to 5 different letters being combined to form 2 Corinthians. Even Philippians, the Philippian hymns, is unlike any Pauline epistle, and so it could have probably been added on much later as well. So the unity of the Philippian letters is questionable as well. But I think the highly questionable is the letter to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. As far as my understanding goes, Romans and Galatians are pretty much solid because they share the same theme. It's about the law. Obviously, in Galatian, Paul do not have the welcome message. Welcome message, the peaceful welcome message, have been changed to admonishes. And then Paul's language in Galatian is absolutely um, unbecoming of an apostle. If you want to be hard on Paul, because he mentions what have bewitched the Galatians, or foolish Galatians. He uses this sort of language, and he also mentions that when they are being circumcised, um, the the knife will slip, and then it will cut off their, you know what I mean. And so these are these are the languages that Paul uses. Um, he was very fierce in his letter to the Galatians, because he was absolutely angry because the the people that came after him, probably people from James, probably Jews, yeah, we do not know, or even it could be people that are Gentiles, even that have converted to Judaism, so they're not necessarily like ethnically Jewish, okay? Um, but nevertheless, they opposes Paul, and they probably preach that Gentiles need to be circumcised. And so Paul was very angry with this. And so he mentions that, did I not portray to you that Jesus is crucified before your very eyes, and things like that. So ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you now probably have a brief chronology of the life of Paul. Um, and a lot of different scholars gave a different table for the life of Paul, as N.T. Wright and Michael Bird does in his New Testament and its world. Though it's not a lot of difference compared to Raymond Brown's work, but I do trust Raymond Brown's work more, because he's a brilliant scholar, and he's a distinguished scholar, and he is pretty much very honest in his writings. He would probably conclude something that goes against his theology, and this is how you differentiate between a scholar that is honest in their work, and that they allow the evidence to actually uh, tell their conclusion. Because there's a lot of works being written out there that, for example, the works on historical Jesus, or works on the gospel, that at the end of the day, their conclusion mirrors their theology, and they are not playing by the historical rules fairly. But Raymond Brown, for the most part, and I've read a lot of his work, and a lot of other scholars attest to this as well, that he is generally very honest in his work, in his commentary, and things like that. And he's a Roman Catholic priest before he passed away. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I completely recommend you Raymond Brown's work. He's died, okay, so he cannot change his mind, unlike scholars today, whereby they're still alive, they can still change their mind. And so Raymond Brown can never change his mind, because he's passed away. Now I have a lot of I've seen a lot of people that probably wonders, is this work still updated, or is it up to date? I would say 95% is up to date. Apart from the dating of Luke, people dating of Acts, scholars tend to put it to around 120 today. And apart from the source for Johannine Gospels, scholars have different opinion today. But yeah, pretty much this is still updated, and I think it will continue to be updated even 50 years from now. So ladies and gentlemen, this is a great resource for you, for Muslims especially, if you want to know about the books in the New Testament. If 800 pages is too much for you, then 300 pages of the abridged version shall actually help you understand the book better. um, yeah, anyway, I've reviewed this book before and you can check out my videos on that. I'll see you on my next one. My name is Arafat, and Assalamu alaikum.